What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. From Mtg, we like magic, and today I'm going to show off a deck I've been cooking up for a while now in preparation for the new format, because I think there's a lot of reasons to play this thing. Here's Naya Monsters. That's right, Naya, of all things. Always an interesting choice because you don't really see it very often, but I honestly think that Naya might have the right stuff to be one of the best mid-range decks in the format come rotation. So let's take a look, starting with the 4 copies of War Elves. Absolute no-brainer inclusion from where I'm sitting. All 4 copies of this because it's one of the best reasons to play green in all of Standard. It gives mid-range decks that extra little speed boost they need to compete in the early game and through to the middle and long game, for that matter. Plus, remember, no more Fatal Push to have to worry about once rotation hits, and, hopefully, Goblin Chainwhirler's presence in the format will be somewhat diminished come autumn. You know, he's still going to be in decks. You're still going to see him, but hopefully he won't be in like 1 out of every 2 decks. And all that is good news for War Elves. You know, I think you could successfully make the argument that War Elves has been somewhat oppressed or suppressed since it re-entered the format. But once rotation hits, I think it finally gets the green light to be the card that it's supposed to be. I think it'll be in better shape once rotation happens than it's been since it got reprinted. Now, of course, one of the best things War Elves can do for us is ramp us into a 3-drop on turn 2. So, let's go ahead and look at some of the things we can do on turn 2 after a turn 1 War Elves. We're going to play 4 copies of Gift of Paradise, believe it or not, and 3 copies of Thrashing Brontodon. Now, Brontodon's easy. You know, a 3-mana 3/4 is a super solid body, especially after rotation when you don't have like Chandra, Glorybringer, a bunch of cards that deal specifically 4 damage. Creatures with 4 toughness just get better, and Thrashing Brontodon's a good example. It's awesome against a Chainwhirler in combat. There's all kinds of reasons why you want a Thrashing Brontodon just for the stats to CMC ratio, but this is also going to be a good, you know, tool against Seal Away, Ixalan's Binding, and I think we're going to see even more of those after rotation. Plus any, you know, random artifacts you can bust up with this. History of Benalia is in there too. There's all kinds of stuff you might want to kill with a Thrashing Brontodon. So I think that's an easy inclusion, but as far as the Gift of Paradise, this is actually much more important than it might look. We're a 3-color deck without all the fixing that we might necessarily want, so this is really important for making that second red mana, or that second white mana that we might need. I also like that both of these are just fine 3-drops. Even if you don't get that turn 1 War Elves, you don't feel too bad about having these in your opening hand. They're both good on turn 3. But that's important because, of course, you won't always get your turn 1 War Elves. It helps an awful lot, but you also have to have something to do on the first couple of turns of the game if you don't have an Elves in your opener. So let's look at some of our options here. We've got 4 copies of Merfolk Branchwalker for our turn 2, and 4 copies of Adventurous Impulse on turn 1. And really, both of these are fine on just about any turn of the game, you know, no matter which way you slice it. These are good cards, especially Adventurous Impulse. I've liked Impulse for a long time at this point. 1 green mana is a steal for this kind of card selection that not only helps you fix your mana, that's super important, but it also pushes the land count down simultaneously. That's awesome. It also just helps you find creatures. That's great. It's a decent top deck, even on like turn 7, and it's great in the early game too, for helping you get set up and helping your sequencing that early in the game. So I like a lot about Adventurous Impulse. I'm playing all 4 here, but I think you could maybe cut a copy or 2, but I wouldn't want to be honest with you. Adventurous Impulse just really helps your consistency. But I wanted a solid 2-drop body for the deck. You know, again, we can't just put all of our eggs into the War Elves basket and hope that works out. If we miss War Elves, I really like to put a body on the ground on turn 2. And Merfolk Branchwalker, based on what we know, is probably the best way to do it, especially considering we need as much mana fixing for this deck as we can get. You know, we're 3 colors, and from the information we currently have, we don't have the best mana base in the world. So we need to take what fixing we can get. But, that said, Gift of Paradise, Adventurous Impulse, Branchwalker, this all forms a pretty good core when it comes to fixing our mana. Plus, Branchwalker, again, we need early interaction in the current standard to do anything, you know, to trade creatures against aggro when they attack into us, to do early damage against control. You need some form of early on-board interaction. And I think, again, that Merfolk Branchwalker is the best way to do that. That may very well change when Guilds of Ravnica comes out, but for the time being, Branchwalker is a good way to not only get some early interaction, some early board presence, but also to help fix our mana and give us sort of a pseudo-scry. All of that is really important. Now, before we get to the actual like monsters aspect of this monsters deck, I want to run through the removal real quick, because I was going to save the removal to the end, but that would feel anticlimactic It really won't take too long to go through it here. So with that in mind, we're going to play 2 copies of Shock, 4 copies of Lightning Strike, and 2 copies of Ixalan's Binding. Now, these are the first non-green cards that you've seen in this deck tech. We're obviously a base green deck, but there are definitely reasons to play these cards. Obviously, this is a pretty banging removal suite right here. Shock is still going to be important after rotation. It's going to kill Llanowar Elves and all manner of tribal creatures that have 2 toughness. Shock is going to be good against, so I don't think Shock's going anywhere or losing relevance anytime soon. Same thing with Lightning Strike. This also kills small to medium guys. And both of these, Shock and Lightning Strike, will help you pick off Planeswalkers. That's probably going to be important. It has been up to now. And they're never dead. Both of these red removal spells can always target the player if you have nothing better to do with them. So game 1, they'll never feel stuck in your hand or anything. But then there's Ixalan's Binding, which is actually, subtly, one of the best reasons to play white in this deck. This stops Teferi, it stops Galta, it stops Kindling Phoenix, it stops Steel Leaf Champion even. There's a ton of creatures that are going to be important, and Planeswalkers for that matter, that are going to be important after rotation comes. This is going to stop a Nicol Bolas from flipping over once they start getting a little bit too much mana. So there's just a million reasons to play Ixalan's Binding. Not even knowing what's in Guilds of Ravnica, there are still tons of really powerful things that we have to have an option for removing. And Ixalan's Binding is maybe going to be the best option in the format for dealing with just about anything. Well, let's talk about Dim Monsters to bring things home here. Starting with the 4 copies of Kindling Phoenix because, I don't know why you would carry less than a playset of this. It's arguably the best creature in Standard after rotation. Again, I'll say it 1,000 times in the next 3 weeks. We don't know what's in guilds at this point, but I think it's safe to say that Kindling Phoenix is going to be in the top 3 to 5 creatures in the format. It's going to be super scary. It demands exile removal, or it's just going to keep coming back. And I really don't see it being any less of a creature 3 or 4 weeks from now. Kindling Phoenix is super scary, and that's going to stay the same. We'll play all 4 copies because it's really, really difficult to deal with. Now, I'm also going to work in 2 copies of Shalai here in the 4-drop slot. This is actually subtly one of the other best reasons to play white in this deck. Just the activated ability is a way to break games wide open. It's really threatening when you're on defense, but obviously if you just got Shalai and another flyer like a Rekindling Phoenix out, then just one activation of her ability can just end the game on the spot. That can be really important once it gets to the later phases. But of course, the real reason to play Shalai is the fact that she gives you and all your dudes hexproof, except for her. So that's just great, especially in combination with the Rekindling Phoenix. It protects your Phoenix from cards like Seal Away, Ixalan's Binding, Vraska's Contempt. They got to hit your Shalai first, and it even protects you from Settle the Wreckage. Remember that Settle the Wreckage targets a player, and they can't target you, so they can't Settle the Wreckage you, which is also super relevant. You need to remember that. And, it's not like Phoenix is the only other creature we're trying to protect in this list. We've got a lot of big, dumb, juicy, meaty threats in this deck, and we want to finish the game with them, and we have to protect them. And Shalai's really good at that, even if she's just a diversion. If your opponent has to target her with a Vraska's Contempt or something like that, well, yeah, your creatures won't get to keep their hexproof forever, but at least they had to use a Vraska's Contempt on your Shalai, and God knows how long it'll be until they draw another one, but you get to beat their face in until they do. But we're also playing 3 whole copies of Lyra Dawnbringer in the deck. At first it was 2, but really, Lyra's just one of the best cards in the deck, and you can get her on turn 3. We've already talked about this. You can go Llanowar Elves into Gift of Paradise, get her turn 3, or even, depending on what lands you end up with, you can just go double Llanowar Elves into a Lyra. There's a couple of ways to get this down super early, and it's a ridiculous threat against, everything. It demands removal if you're playing against control. Against aggro, it's just really difficult for them to race this, and it outclasses just about everything else that they play, and this is even really good against the mono green decks. Again, especially after rotation, they just won't have a whole lot of tools to actually fight this. You're going to fly over their head most of the time, bash them in the face, and it's going to be very hard for them to race you doing that. Plus, this gives us 1 billion flying creatures. This gives us 9 flying creatures in total, which is an awful lot for, just your basic, what would normally be a more ground-based mid-range deck. We actually have a ton of evasion in this deck, so it's not hard to finish a game off in the air. But to finish her off here, we're just going to play one copy in the main deck of Carnage Tyrant, which is just your ace in the hole against blue-white control. And an over-the-top finisher against just about everything, you know. We've got plenty of ramp in this deck between Elves and Gifted Paradise. We can usually get this down on turn 5, easy peasy, if not before that, some of the time. And just about any turn this comes down, it's going to have an effect on the game. You know, it's just got all the stats in the world. They can't really do much about it, and they especially can't counter it. You know, it's going to trample through everything. Just Carnage Tyrant is still a ridiculous beast, and I don't see any reason not to play one copy in the main, especially considering that I bet blue-white control is going to be a really good deck after rotation. And this is a really good piece against them. Really the best piece against them. So we'll play that. We'll play at least one copy in the main because, again, I expect to see a lot of control after rotation, and this just murders them. But here are the lands, kind of the worst part of the deck, but we'll get into that in a second. We've got 23 lands in this deck, which looks maybe a land or two light, but remember, we've got Lana Elves, Gifted Paradise, Adventurous Impulse, Merfolk Branchwalker. We've got so many ways of getting lands, fixing our mana, ramping even in this deck that it affords us a pretty low land count. That said, the number of each colored source is not necessarily where I'd want it to be honest with you. I'd like at least one more red and one more white source, if nothing else. But I will say that both Selesnya, green-white, and Boros, red-white, are going to be in Guilds of Ravnica. And I will eat the top of my head I don't know how that's going to work, but I will. If there aren't good, decent dual lands in those guilds, in Guilds of Ravnica. You know, I think it's an extremely safe bet that we're going to see very decent, if not shockland level, dual lands in Guilds of Ravnica for both of these guilds. So I think that it's safe to say that come rotation, the mana will actually look a lot better than it does currently. But here's the sideboard right here, and I actually don't have to go too in-depth, I don't think. You know, we'll finish off the playset of Shock against small creatures, Lana Elves, stuff like that. You know, really low-to-the-ground aggro. Shock's important. So we've also got Seal Away in there for an instant speed, exile-based answer to all kinds of important creatures in the format that we may run up against. I just feel like it's important to have at least one copy of Seal Away somewhere in the 75 if we're going to be carrying white mana. Same thing with Settle the Wreckage. You know, this costs 2 white, which is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world for us to make, but I think Settle the Wreckage is just that important to play, especially against aggro that's trying to beat you as quickly as possible. Settle the Wreckage is the best answer. Settle is also a really good answer against cards like Carnage Tyrant and Vinemare, for that matter, things we couldn't otherwise target. And Vinemare's so good that we're going to play some of them, all 4 of them in fact, and this won't only come in against black decks, although all 4 copies will come in against decks that like mainline black, you know, so just ridiculous against them. But this will also come in against control because it's a very, very, very hard to deal with threat. That's also why we'll bring in the second copy of Carnage Tyrant, just another unstoppable card against control. And although we don't necessarily have the best game 1 against them, we do have plenty of tools game 2. You know, we've got Vinemare, we've got Carnage Tyrant, and we've got the 2 copies of Banefire, which are obviously ridiculous against control. Some people are carrying 4 copies of this against blue-white in their sideboard. I don't think we have to go that far, especially with all the other tools we have against control in our board. We don't have to go crazy and play 4 Banefire, but I will keep a couple of copies in there against, you know, control for just beating them in the super late game. But we've also got Vivian Reed in there, which is also ostensibly against control. This is a card advantage engine in the late game, and that's something we really need against them, is to eke out card advantage. But this can also come in to beat up, you know, problem permanents, flyers that we don't want to have to deal with. This is really good against, and artifacts, enchantments, blah blah. This is also an extra, you know, option against them. So there's that, but mostly you'll bring this in against control to just help you, quote-unquote, draw more cards. Man, this fly is the star of this video. There's no way I've managed to keep him off camera. Unless I have, and you just think I look very crazy by saying, man, this fly is the star of the video. But I'm sure he's shown up, and he'll probably show up again. But I can't get rid of him. Anyway, here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 67, which is a pretty dang old good score, but it better be, because the deck cost a pretty penny. But you get what you pay for. You know, there are a bunch of powerful cards in this deck. It can finish a game off relatively fast if it can curve out the way it wants to. It gets high marks in both defense and offense. That's nice. And it's got good versatility, which is really what you're looking for in a good mid-range deck. We've got a wide spread of options between, the early game, which we do have options in, plus the mid-game is just filled with really good threats and really hot removal for the upcoming format too. The deck has a wide array of options at its disposal, and that's important for a mid-range deck. The only things I'd really like to work on are maybe the consistency, but again, I think that consistency will get a little bit better when we get a better land base come fall. I'd also like a way to draw more cards in this deck outside of having to play Karn. Again, I just think we're really stacked on 4-drops as it is, and we don't have any synergy with Karn in the artifact department, so I just don't know how good of a slot that would be if we played Karn, but it's at least a thought. I'd really like to be able to draw some cards in this thing and get some gas. So, all that said, though, the deck is good in a lot of ways. Again, very versatile. It's got a nice removal package. It can either sit back and play a more controlling game in the early game, remove that guy. Here's a big finisher, deal with that, or it can just play the tap out mid-range game. I'm going to play the biggest, dumbest threat at this spot on the curve in all of Standard on every single turn. Starting on turn 3, you can just go like Thrashing Bronson on into, a turn 4 Kindling Phoenix, into a turn 5 Lyra, Carnage Tyrant. You're just playing the biggest, most rabid, slobbering, dumb, foaming at the mouth threat that you possibly can on every single turn. So if you're into tap out mid-range, you can play it like that too. Now, if you're interested in giving this thing a try, it's currently about $270 over on TCG Player. They are good people because they sponsor my content, but they're also where you're going to get this deck for the absolute cheapest. I don't want you to overpay for this one because it is a speculative deck, but I do have an awful lot of faith in it, and I think it's worth every penny of that. Again, play a lot of powerful cards in this deck, so one way or the other, this is probably going to be a pretty good thing almost no matter what the format ends up looking like, because decks that just play all the most powerful cards tend to be safe bets. So remember, as always, just click the first link in the description box below me down there, and that'll take you over to the deck list on their website. You can view the whole thing in one compact, concise location. That's nifty. That's handy dandy, but you can also order any missing pieces that you might need straight off their website, because that's how online shopping works. Aside from that, hit like on your way out. Make sure you do that for me if nothing else. But there are other things you could do that require almost no effort on your part. Just hit subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Or if you somehow haven't seen me yet, this is your first time seeing me, hello. Welcome to the channel. I do this for a living and I really enjoy it. So keep helping me do that by making sure you subscribe to the channel. Get me to 100,000, or you can throw me $1 a month on Patreon. I'll let you know what videos we're doing the day before we do them, let you participate in all these polls. You can vote for what videos and decks and stuff you want to see next. It's a good time. Being part of the Patreon is a good time, and it's a whole $1 every 30 to 31 days. So that's not really too much to ask. I'll give you a link in the description down there if you're interested in supporting the channel. It would really help out. But with that, pretty sure I'm tapped out, but it's your turn now. Go ahead and hit the comments section. Let me know how you feel about this admittedly speculative deck right here, but pretty strong thing. I don't think that's too hard to deny. But let me know how we could change it, make it better, make it, again, a little bit more concise if we need to do that. So let me know thoughts and opinions. I'm welcome to those. Criticism, all that stuff. I'm a big boy, I can take it, so let me know all your thoughts and emotions about this deck in the comments section down there, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to hit that old dusty trail. I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.